questions from them. So we'll get started here shortly. Waiting for a couple of more to come by, and then we'll go ahead and we'll get going here. But for those of us that are on live, thank you as well for coming out and visiting with us today. And we'll get started here shortly. Yat e shikedo do shidene e shea nakai nishle aro nakai bahe basichin aro bojugo de shiche aro nakai de chanele cameo me here yinishe. You're a career education advisor here at Diné College, and I want to thank you for coming out to day one of Career Builder Week. Let me go ahead and tell you a little bit about how Career Builder Week came to Diné College and came to be a program that happens about once every semester. We run Career Builder Week. So first off, Career Builder Week comes out of the Career Education Program. The Career Education Program is based out of our student affairs, helping students guide them down their career pathways. And the way we do that is we rely a lot on the SNBH philosophy. So going through that, we have our students first start stage one, getting them to think about their careers. Then moving forward, we start them off, getting them some planning, getting them things like resumes, interviewing, email etiquette, different things that will make them strong performers inside the workforce. Then moving forward, we move into our third stage of Ina, having our students engage in real life work, having our students work here on campus, or even sending our students off to external internships that are offering them employment. That way they can build up some skills and have something to write on their resume when they graduate here from Diné College. Moving forward, our final stage, Sihasin. So getting our students to reflect on all those skills that they may have built up while working with the career education program. So career exploration, understanding where their career is going to take them, and then being able to build that resume and those interviewing skills to get them into the job, and then of course building those real life professional skills and bringing that full circle to Sihasin, which is going to be connecting them to real career pathways. That way we leave Diné College with the career pathway in mind and not leaving Diné College with what do I do next. So today, moving forward with that, it is my honor to bring our keynote speaker, Council Delegate Carl Slater. He's going to go ahead and share with us a little bit about his college and career pathways and how he got to be his success. So do me the honor of welcoming Carl Slater.
Okay, I got to put on my Diné College swag. I'm joking. Okay. But it's cold today, so I got to put this vest on. Okay. Can you all hear me okay? Great. Well, good morning, everyone. It's really a pleasure to be here, and I want to express my appreciation to the college for the invitation and the opportunity to present to you all. I think I still get, what's the right word? I question myself when people are like, oh, okay, tell me how you got here and why you're here, et cetera, because it's been a winding path, and I can't say that it's been something simple. It's filled with the ordinary ups and downs that life brings to you. So if there's one thing that you take away from this talk, it's that no matter what, under any circumstances, do not run for, seek, or become a council delegate. I'm just kidding. If anything, I want to encourage you to participate in your communities in ways that are comfortable and think about the things that make you uncomfortable and why. Because through that assessment, I believe you'll begin to understand what your strengths are, what you believe your limitations are, and how you can best contribute to making a strong and beautiful Navajo nation. So, Adonai Nishlinagi e Kia'ani, She'e Sontane Bashishchin, Tsinajani Dashache do Sontane Dashanella, Tsanakana Dentnasha, She'e Carl Russell Slater Dashajane. So my name's Carl Slater. I'm Kia'ani, born for the Jewish people, and I represent the chapters of Tsaile, Wheatfields, Black Rock, Lukachukai, Round Rock, Rock Point, and Rough Rock. And I have to recognize our chapter secretary from Rough Rock, Ms. Hadley, right here. So give you a little round of applause. Earlier this week, last week, we lost our chapter president in Rough Rock, Mrs. Betty Daly. So it's been a tough time in that community as we mourn an incredible leader who dedicated herself to the community and really to doing nation building at the community level. So this college is very much intrinsically tied to nation building and self-determination. And whether you're here just to advance yourself and provide more for your family or for your children or for your future children, you're actually participating in the growth and the development of the Navajo people. And I hope that that's something that's not lost on you as you continue to walk through these walls, or I'm looking at the cameras now. I'm sure there's thousands of students listening, right? As you're sitting in your bedroom, pretending to listen in class, maybe some sleepy winkers in your eyes, listening to me. And that's unique. Most college students don't go to an institution that is like Diné College. And it's an incredible gift that you have. So I hope, again, that as you participate in your classes, you think about the purpose of this school. Liberal arts colleges and other institutions were very much set up to educate the citizenry of this country. And it was a departure from some of the research institutions that existed in Europe. And I think that we've fashioned a school in our own way to do something similar, that's grounded in our traditions, in our teachings, and making sure that we can perpetuate them for future generations in a way that's meaningful to them, but honors the source of those teachings from our Dean Diné. So I live in Round Rock. I live in the house that my mom and her siblings were primarily raised in, and that's a huge gift to me. It's a source of strength and power. It's an old house, though, so it can drain you a little bit, too, with trying to keep it up. But I was actually born in Washington, D.C. So my parents, Faith Russell and Matthew Slater, they were out there working. As you heard before, my dad is Jewish. He was born in New York, and his family immigrated to this country kind of like in the early 20th century, late 19th century. And they were escaping persecution in what was then the Russian Empire, and now is Ukraine, and maybe the Russian Empire again soon, we'll see. But the life that they built and supported my brothers and me with is really a source of strength. And I know that not everyone is blessed to have that whole and complete home, but we each have the agency and decision-making possibilities in our mind and in our souls to guide us into that good life. And it's up to us to exercise that. No matter the circumstances that we have to uphold our teachings, we have to honor them, and we have to support our family, our clan, and our communities. So DC and Maryland, where I spent the school year, is worlds away from here. And that was a huge, jarring juxtaposition for me to come back home. I mean, if we had one day off from school and it was a long weekend, my mom was bringing us back to Round Rock. You know, I think we went to the beach a couple times when I was younger. We were not going to the shore. We were coming back to Round Rock because she wanted us to know that this was our home, and this is where we needed to be comfortable and where we needed to learn about who we are. And when I'd come home, you know, I had family, we had family friends, still had dirt floor hogans, and living in one-room houses, no running water, got a generator on. I'm sure this is very familiar to a lot of people either in this room or on the internet right now. And then you go back to Bethesda, Maryland, and you always see these surveys that say, like, has the highest number of, like, PhDs of any city or something in the United States. You have a very educated workforce. You got the National Institutes of Health, National Naval Medical Center, a lot of people who have excelled and been compensated in that way. You know, paved streets, it's green. You go back and you think you're in a jungle, being in Round Rock. And it's something that made me question, why is there this disparity in living standards? Why am I surrounded by kids who can afford a soccer ball, a basketball, don't have trouble paying for football equipment, renting saxophone or a trumpet or something like that? And why back home are things like this? And so from a very young age, I felt a need to make those questions, to interrogate why in this country and in our society we have these disparities. And they don't just exist, obviously, in rural America and on the reservation. There is poverty and lack of access to opportunity in urban areas as well. But I think growing up, something that a lot of people in the urban core of this country don't realize and recognize is what lack of opportunity and rural poverty is, and how much more difficult that is relative to being in Southeast DC or being in Baltimore. It's totally different. You can scrape together a few pennies, a few nickels, and catch a bus ride if you're in DC to get to a job, to get to an interview. But here, you're hitching, right? If you want to make that first step, there are so many more barriers put in your way for you to confront to seek that. So if you've made it to this point at DC, I know a lot of you have made those sacrifices to get here. And you can't only focus on the goal, but recognize how far you've come and pat yourself on the back for getting there. So Maryland, good education. I went to public school through 8th grade, and then I felt like they were teaching to the test too much, so I asked my parents if I could explore some other schooling options, and I had the opportunity to go to a school in DC called Georgetown Day School. And that for me was even a huge change from just Bethesda, you know. Bethesda I thought was like, wow, this is like a little suburban paradise. And then you end up at one of these schools in DC, and you got kids there, they're the children of like senators. When the Nationals came, the ownership group was a part of the school, or the kids were enrolled there. It was another level of privilege and wealth that I hadn't even contemplated in my young life. And again, I was like, why is this? Interrogating this sort of stratification that we have and the differences in opportunity that we all confront. So I think some of you may be aware of my family. My Che and my Masana were the late Bob and Ruth Russell, and they were instrumental in helping me appreciate who I am and understand who I am. My Che always had us do this exercise, and if you knew him, he was like 6'3" or something. He's a big guy, strong guy, physically, mentally, spiritually. But he'd have us stand on one leg and say, you know, that's the Bilagana side of you. Stand the other leg, that's the Diné side of you. And each time he'd push you over so that you'd see how precarious you were, how ungrounded you were if you were only standing on one foot. And it might seem a little cheesy, but I've never forgotten that. And it's something that my mom was raised with too. So this institution and the paths that you're walking right now is very much tied into that. We're grounded in Diné philosophy, but we're advancing our intellectual capabilities, grounded in that, to interact and engage with the exterior world. And the skills that you develop here will help you accomplish that. But you have to have a fire inside you to seek out meaning and goodness in life. And so I hope walking through some of my experiences, you'll see where that fire comes from within me. So I went to high school there, played some sports. I think that it's very important to keep yourself physically strong in order to confront lethargy, laziness. We were just talking about biking. That's something that I continue to do. Because you can hone your muscle in your mind, but if you're not physically fit and taking care of yourself, you'll atrophy overall. If you can't take care of yourself, put good food into you, exercise, you're actually not honoring all of our teachings and how to take care of yourself. So please remember that. I think sports and physical exercise are paramount to being the best that you possibly can. And I say that with a guy who has a few extra lbs around his waist, but I digress. So I played lacrosse. I love that, kind of fell in love with lacrosse because I knew that it was a sport that Indians played on the East Coast and maybe around the Great Lakes area, and I was naturally drawn to it, and I started to get pretty serious about it. So I thought maybe by sophomore year, if I wasn't 6'5", I should probably drop basketball, and I didn't shrink since then, so I'm not 6'5", 6 foot on a good day. But I got serious about lacrosse, started playing like in club teams, et cetera, and that started to guide like what my college decisions would be, because I thought maybe I might be good enough to play for a lower end D1 team, whether that was starting or riding the bench, probably riding the bench. But there are all these other types of schools out there. And on the East Coast, there's a high concentration of these like small liberal arts colleges that play pretty high level D3 lacrosse. And I thought, okay, that's interesting. So I looked at a lot of those, looked at some of the Ivies, deluding myself into thinking I'd end up there. And then my Masana, she was kind of getting on in age, and she was having some illnesses here and there, but I'd already lost my Che at that point. He had made his final journey. So I found this school called Colorado College in Colorado Springs, and they've had quite a few Navajos go through there. I think Mr. Peterson Zah, was actually on their board for a period in the 90s. And it was styled after, those East Coast liberal arts schools. So I felt like some comfort and understanding in what they were trying to accomplish, and thought, a smaller school environment, not, like 50,000 kids over at ASU, was something that I'd be comfortable with. And I'd have the opportunity to play, NCAA lacrosse. So I ended up going to CC thinking I'll be able to come home. I'm like 8-ish, maybe 9 hours from Round Rock, and I made that decision for lacrosse, to be able to spend time with my Masana, knowing that she was getting on in age, and to experience the outdoors, because Colorado Springs, you have great access to the mountains and to all of the gifts of nature. And then, of course, for the education, thinking about the types of things that I might want to do. My family's been fairly political, both on the policy side, less on, I'd say, on the elected leadership side. And in high school, I started a community service trip to help satisfy the graduation requirements for my peers and I at Georgetown Day School. So we would bring students out over the summer, and they would spend a few weeks here or over in Round Rock. Sometimes we would volunteer at like Santa Fe Indian School, work up at Red Mesa High School, and we'd do summer enrichment activities with the children. And that is something that I always thought, if I have access to resources or opportunity to help my communities that I grew up with, I should bring them there, and I should try to help enrich them. So when I was at CC, I thought, okay, well, I'm interested in policy. You know, we, as a part of those trips, would also go to Capitol Hill, and we advocated for the reauthorization of something called the Indian Healthcare Improvement Act. And eventually, in the Affordable Care Act, it was reauthorized. And it's a very important piece of legislation that supports healthcare across Indian country, supports the IHS system, and has some other unique things that the nation is starting to take advantage of. So throughout high school, I was exposed to a lot of policy matters and tried to share that with my peers. And that really came from my mother, Faith Russell. She used to be the director of the Navajo Nation Washington office. She was the first Navajo woman who was the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Indian Affairs at the Department of the Interior. And that's really what brought her out to DC, was to work for the former Senator Jeff Bingaman. And then Mr. Sa'ah asked her to restart the Washington office. So, you know, if policy is something that's interesting to you, Google is free. I highly encourage you to educate yourself as much as you possibly can with those resources, because I was lucky growing up that I had a mom who knew a lot about this stuff, who could educate me. But if you're growing up in Rough Rock and your parents are teachers, they might not know a ton about policy. But the way things are going, you can read every piece of legislation in Congress online. You can read executive orders from the President of the Navajo Nation online, and you can read your Navajo Nation Council resolutions online as well. And developing that familiarity with what legislation looks like is something that takes time. It's not naturally intuitive. Figuring out what a findings section is, figuring out what the therefore be it resolved section is, how you can include directives. It helps to get you to understand why we organize our society in certain ways, and what are those forces that have helped create places like Bethesda and create places like Tsaile. I think there's a lot of ideas in this country about the promise of it, right? That everyone can succeed if they want to. I remain hopeful that that's a possibility, but there are huge forces in this world that work against ordinary people from just trying to stay afloat and get ahead. And as you read through what everything from your local city council to the US Senate is working on, you see what the priorities are of those who have been elected into power. And you gotta think, why are these the priorities? What are the things that are important to me and my grandparents or my siblings or my peers in class? What are those things that will help us in our lives? Because that's the purpose of government in my mind, is to help people. Help them fulfill their own self-defined prosperity, their communal prosperity. That's what I think is an important charge. So when I got to CC, Colorado College, I was thinking about different things to do. I wasn't super interested in going into business or something like that, but ended up, God, I'm trying to think. I think it was freshman year. I had, they call it your first year experience course. So it's supposed to kind of transition you into college academics. And I think it was like a 2-block course. So CC is unique in that you take 4 3.5-week blocks, and that's your full course load for a semester. And then you can take adjunct classes like in the afternoons or whenever those are scheduled. So the first course that I took at Colorado College was like a Russian history, culture, and then there was a language component. And I got really interested in it. I'd always wondered why and what were the circumstances under which my father's family had fled Eastern Europe, and how they had ended up here. And for me, it was an opportunity to learn about the environment, the history, the culture that brought them to this country, essentially forcing them out. And growing up, I was very much raised with Holocaust education as well. So trying to figure out why in a society do we target minorities or outgroups for persecution? What benefit is there? And what are the broader things we can learn by studying those episodes in history about ourselves, human nature, about the types of communities we build, and what we can do to prevent these types of things from happening in the future, and what that might look like in different environments. This country is definitely not devoid of persecution. It exists. So I ended up doing a history, what do they call it? History, political science. It's like an interdisciplinary major in Russian. And I focused like Eastern Europe, but it was also looking at some stuff in Central Asia too, because the Soviet Union had constituent parts of it that were in Central Asia. And I'm telling you this now and chuckling because I don't know how many council delegates or other elected leaders of the Navajo Nation studied those types of things with the intention of coming back to the Navajo Nation and trying to serve their people. But how many of you are studying Russian? Let me just ask you that right now. How many of you know any Russian? Online, they're all raising their hands, so you guys got to catch up. I'm joking. So, do you guys know what the USSR was? The Union of Soviet Socialist Republics? Okay, I see the old heads nodding their head. No. Prior to when a lot of you were born, there was a country or a state, and it was founded on socialist and communist principles in the early 20th century. And it was a counter superpower to the United States in seeking hegemony, from an international relations standpoint, but was guided by, socialist and communist principles and advancing that across the world, combating colonialism and trying to seek liberation for the peoples of this earth who have been dominated by primarily Western European colonial powers. And these individual states that made up this union were comprised of hundreds and hundreds of different ethnicities and nationalities. And they were brought together, sometimes through force, sometimes in other ways, to work for those same principles and create interoperability, understanding, mutual development. So I was fascinated by that, and it has actually guided a lot of my thinking and what types of development do we want to see on Navajo? What types of communities do we want to build? Because we have a nation here that is not like Farmington or Cortez or New York City or anything, right? It's rural. We have different ideas of land tenure. How do we use the land? Who has access to it? Our matrilineal society, our matriarchy, how we develop our government. And these are questions that had to be confronted in each of these nations within the USSR. And then you had a period in the 90s and a little before then, kind of like the post-Soviet, post-communist period. And it was a transition for those economies and those nations into, say, the Western finance capitalist order. And it was a huge, jarring upheaval for hundreds of millions of people on this earth that we share. And I look at how those societies transitioned and what their outcomes are when I think about a lot of the nation-building activities that we seek to do on the council. And I'll get to how I got to the council in a minute, but I want you to know that there are things from my education that I never anticipated being relevant in the job that I have now. And you're gonna find those unique things. It could be a stats class that you take when you move to Vegas and become a professional poker player. No, I'm just kidding. It could be, learning some sociology that might influence how you organize a department that you have if you become a program or department manager. Those are the sorts of things that you're not gonna know in advance, But you're only going to have that knowledge if you invest and avail yourself into the study and the inquiry that you have opportunity to do at Diné College. So don't shortchange your time here. Don't be lazy. Life happens. There's other ways of saying that. But don't let it sidetrack you. One of my favorite quotes that I made a decision at a certain point in my life to follow was from Master Yoda, and says, there's only do or not do, there is no try. So if I say I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it. If I say I'm going to try, I'm probably setting myself up for failure and accommodation and acquiescence. If I say I can't do it, it means I have reasons that I can't, but maybe I'll be able to do it at another time. I think that's pretty in tune with Navajo philosophy too. We don't have a lot of queasy squeamishness and maybe this or that. Usually we just kind of clam up and don't say anything. So when I was at CC, I studied that. I played lacrosse. Midway through my junior year, decided lacrosse was taking up way too much time and that I wanted to hopefully focus more on my studies, but ski and do other things and enjoy the outdoors. So I graduated from CC, and before I graduated, I had an opportunity to intern for Senator Bingaman in his last term in DC, and then I was asked to stay on as like a temporary staff assistant until the end of his term. From there, I learned I love policy. I love being exposed in a congressional office to everything that's happening in the United States. Anything that your constituents are concerned about or something that you should be concerned about as a legislator. And seeing the workings of those types of offices from a really decent, intelligent, upstanding person like Senator Bingaman was inspiring. You might see a lot of these politicians and other people and they have like a whole entourage, right? I remember, I was told, oh, let's go see him speak at this, I think it was like an energy roundtable at a hotel. And they were briefing us in advance that he's going to walk just with the chief of staff or the legislative director, and we're all going to go our own way. And what was conveyed is that he is himself. He's not trying to be intimidating anyone. He's not trying to act like a king. He's not trying to be a little prince walking around. No. He is there representing his ideas as a humble person on behalf of the people and taking their concerns and elevating them to the highest levels. And that's something that I appreciate and has influenced my leadership style. I don't think that that's a useful tactic. It's not inviting or warm to have a huge entourage and do all of those things. I'm me, and you should have access to me. So after CC, I knew I either wanted to get back on the Hill or I wanted to come home. And I started applying to jobs, and gosh, I'm trying to think. What happened exactly after? Oh, I worked a campaign in Virginia. So there was a governor, or there's a guy running for governor, Terry McAuliffe, from Syracuse, New York. And my family friend always said, I always thought a guy from Syracuse, New York should be the governor of Virginia, but that's politics. I worked on his campaign, and then I left that because I'd done the policy side, the legislative side. I wanted to see the other side, which is getting people into office and organizing there. So I went and worked that campaign, and then I ended up working for a local House of Delegates in Virginia. They don't have like a House of Representatives. It's a House of Delegates, and we lost by about, I think it was 17 votes. So I sweated my behind off in that summer heat in Virginia, and I tasted the bitter taste of defeat by only 15 votes. You're like, damn, if I had just knocked a few more doors, if I had just put another hour of phone calls in, phone banking, would we have won this race? And I felt somewhat of a letdown to my candidate and to my team, as a deputy field director. But it was an incredible lesson to me in how precarious these elections are, how tight they are, and how they end up governing all the decisions that affect each of us. And there are a lot of big social issues that were being debated in Virginia at that time, everything from abortion, there were policy things like healthcare, expansion of Medicaid, that were really on the line based off of the complexion of the legislature. And keeping the legislature in Republican control would have these effects, and putting in Democratic control would have these effects. So just walking up to someone's house, knocking their door, and trying to educate them and learn what's important to them has this trickle and this, it's the domino effect into who ends up as your governor and who decides whether we're going to expand health care for poor people. And each of us have the opportunity to, like the famous Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel said, pray with our feet. He walked, was it from Selma to Montgomery with Dr. King, and this is, in the civil rights era movement, and he said, I felt my feet were praying. And if you think about the Navajo side of things, the Tadadinatin, we very much talk about organizing ourselves and walking that path in harmony and beauty and honoring everything that constructs into it. So you have that opportunity to pray with your feet, know yourself, and try to seek change in your communities by organizing politically, and I want to encourage that. So I ended up not getting hired, in those short couple months, and then out of the blue, there was an opportunity to move to a position over in Crested Butte, Colorado, working at the Adaptive Sports Center. In high school, I had been a volunteer for a class for students with disabilities, somewhat pretty severe disabilities, and helping them get the education that they needed. It was in a religious school setting. I was raised that the Jewish side and the Navajo side were equal, they weren't incompatible, and you needed to be firmly grounded and know both sides of your family. So I was a volunteer in one of those classrooms, and it educated me a lot. So being able to work with people with disabilities and help them experience outdoor activities, sporting activities, was something that was attractive to me, and it helped me develop some of my communication and marketing skills. And based off that experience, I was then able to start applying for some jobs back on Navajo after that winter. I'm sure some of you have been through this experience. You apply late winter, spring, and then you hear back, when did I hear back? Maybe the second week of August. And I had applied for a position over at Navajo DOT as a senior public information officer. And I thought, okay, I have a communications and marketing background a little bit with this job I just had. I can do those sorts of things, but I just want to get back so that I can figure out more firmly what I want to do. I've never had like this predetermined path to get me to X point. It's always been using the values that I have that I was raised with from my parents and my grandparents to guide each decision juncture that I've had. Some of you might know, I want to be a doctor, I want to be a lawyer, I want to be an engineer. And you got that figured out right now. My dad was a Clinton appointee in the Air Force. He's a principal deputy general counsel. And I was fascinated by airplanes as a kid. I didn't understand what he did. It meant he was a lawyer for the Air Force. And on his first day of work, he was trying to tell me what he was doing. I said, okay, don't break any airplanes. I thought, maybe I'd go to the Air Force Academy or try to pursue an aviation career. But at the end of the day, it didn't quite sit right. It was like I was just doing this for me and my personal interests and fascinations, which isn't wrong. I'm not telling you that that's wrong at all. But I felt that I had to contribute to my Navajo people, to our Diné, because that's just what felt natural and comfortable. And so that kind of corralled me to either serving in DC or serving back home. Ended up successfully interviewing for that job, worked at NDOT for quite a few years, and transitioned more into like special projects, intergovernmental relations with the states on, state fuel excise tax funding and other things like that. kind of was a utility player over there, I'd say, and earned their trust by trying to work as hard as I could. And this was in 2015, going into 2016. So, as the Bik'eh administration, Garrett Silversmith was then appointed as the NDOT division director, had an opportunity to work with him. That new team came in, and when I was there, I gained a mentor, and his name was Orlando Teller. He's now the Assistant Secretary for Tribal Government Affairs at the U.S. Department of Transportation. And he's a kid a lot like many of you. He grew up in Valley Store in Del Muerto, families from the Canyon and also from Valley Store. And I think his grandfather, Che, was a code talker. He's someone from very humble roots who has now occupied this position, and he's the first person to occupy this position at US DOT. And he very much had an aviation background, and when he came back to Navajo from working out in California at one of the most elite and prestigious departments of transportation in both the Bay Area and for Caltrans, he then was like, well, I need to come home and contribute to my people with the things that I've learned. And so he established an aviation or airports department at Navajo DOT, and eventually I moved into that position when he became the deputy director. So later in my life, without knowing it, I ended up circling back to aviation. I don't know if people remember this, but there used to be these things you could order through a catalog, and it was like a little 3-ring binder. Some of them was related to animals, and you'd learn about tigers or whatever, or things through history, structures, whatever. My Nully lady, she was an educator too, very smart woman, and she got me the ones that were focused on airplanes. So I could tell you everything about a B-17 to an F-15E, Eagle, when I was a little kid. We'll touch of some, I don't want to say learning disorder, but something where you get that hyper infatuation with different topics and you want to learn as much as you possibly can about them. So I entered the role at NDOT, and it was awesome because I felt that reconnection from my youth was still there. And the principles that had brought me there of coming home, I was honoring. My Che, he was in a very severe car accident at one point. He broke his neck, and his life was saved from that airport in Chinle. And I knew how important these assets were to our people and how important it was to repave them, build them up, that they could be economic development engines and not just something for essential life-saving care. So from there, my mentor Orlando encouraged me to seek leadership positions within the Arizona Airports Association, the New Mexico Airports Association, and I did. I think I got a vice presidency of something or other. And that's what I think is important, that you seek out mentorship. It's not going to take the same shape or form in any environment. Sometimes people will be very subtle about it, and they might just give you that nudge. But it's up to you to be perceptive and to think about, what is this person trying to convey to me? Are they trying to help me advance my career? Are they trying to help me understand a set of techniques or subject matter that will make me a better employee or manager or person, work in a particular environment? Think about those things as you advance, because nothing happens by accident. People even start doing this, unwittingly. But it becomes, I think, an instinct and an impulse. And when you reach that level that you feel you can be a mentor, I hope you feel that obligation, because I feel that now in trying to bring on interns into my role in the council. So I got the job at NDOT, and then from there, there's another election. Speaker Seth Damon was selected as the new speaker of the 24th Council, and I thought, heck, here's a young guy trying to do his best. I've been impressed in some of the meetings that I've been with him in. He had kind of had a mixed past going between, urban areas and then coming back to the res and going back and forth based off his parents' jobs. And I saw a likeness to myself in him. And so I applied to work in his office of the speaker and got a job as the director of communications and government affairs. And I did that from end of January to mid-late July of 2019. And at that point I thought, okay, this is an area of policy that I'm getting back into, a little bit less on administration, execution, and delivery of federal awards for our airports. When I was the airports manager, we rebuilt the Shiprock Airport, we rebuilt Window Rock, we did pavement rehab over in Crown Point and in Tuba City, and I was really proud of that. But my ultimate goal was to rebuild Chinle, based off of, one, it being the biggest or the busiest one on Navajo, and two, the economic potential that I believe it still has. And of course, living, say, 45 miles or 40 miles down the road from it. So I got that position. I just soaked up as much as I possibly could there. The council to me was pretty opaque. I, knew what legislation was, but there was never anyone who took me by the hand and walked me through the system of everything from ideation, having the idea of something, to moving forward with it passing through committees. And I had another mentor there, LaShawna So, and she ended up becoming, I think, the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Indian Education, and then I think she became the Assistant Secretary, or became the Secretary, no, the Assistant Secretary over at the New Mexico Indian Affairs Department. And she also was the Washington office director and had a few different things that she has done in her life. And so she really took me by the hand and walked me through how the council works, the inside baseball. And I'm incredibly grateful to her mentorship in getting to where I am today. So I think a lot of people here remember the late Nelson Begay. He was an incredible individual who served our communities with dignity and humility and had an immense amount of compassion and love for each of you. And he inspired me when he announced that he was going to be resigning from the council and effectively retiring only a few months into his term because of health issues. And unfortunately, a couple of years ago, he walked on from cancer. So he resigned that position, and that was my delegate position. And whatever hubris I had, I thought, should I try and make a go at this? I never thought that I'd be a council delegate. I never thought that I would be accepted to be a leader among my people, but instead that I could support in whatever way I could in policy and advocacy roles. Look at me. I didn't win the Melanin Olympics or lottery. I'm not fluent, but those are still things that are critically important to me. Speaking as much as I can when I can and learning as much as I can. But I know who I am from those lessons of standing on one foot and standing on the other, that I need to know my traditions. And while I might not be able to articulate them in Diné, I grew up going to those ceremonies in our Hogan whenever I could, and continue to this point. So I decided to run. I consulted my family. I thought that it needed to be a family decision and got their consent. And a lot of my mom's siblings, minus President Russell, live off the reservation. So the half-siblings, the aunties, the cousins, everyone else, back here. Started working with them to establish a campaign, and something I really detest in politics is promises. The only promise that I would make is that I'll work as hard as I can with the knowledge and skills that I have to advance the interests of our people. But if someone comes up to you and promises that they're going to pave your road, you should run as far away from that person as possible, unless that road is already paved like N12. I promise you that we're going to get to the next phase of it. So that goes back to do or not do. There is no try. I won that election with, I think, a little over 50 or maybe 55% of the vote. It was an open election, a special election. And then I won re-election November of 22. In that time period, got engaged, had like a stepdaughter, I guess, for some time, got unengaged, bought a Mustang, had my midlife crisis. I've experienced a lot of the things that an ordinary, I think, young person would. I'm 33, and I believe that your democratic governance requires diversity. It can't all be older folks and elders. It can't all be young people. We need to have diverse experiences to make sure when we consider legislation and consider policy that we're examining all of those viewpoints. And that's something that I think that I bring to the council, is those set of experiences that I've had in my life, the educational opportunities, the access to seeing, what are the elite governing institutions, like I don't know if you call Congress elite, but there are definitely elites in there. And think about what we could do to level up our government and not stray from the good path and avoid those things that create disharmony, disunity, and hurt our people. So, I talked a little bit, my education is very important to me. I was on the Health Education Human Services Committee in my first term. I served as the vice chair there, had excellent opportunities to work with this institution and advance a lot of the interests here and try to support our students. And in addition to that, got a very excellent view into healthcare on Navajo, and we also covered, employment and things like that within the nation. I think it's 11 now, so I got to the point in my career where I'm basically at. If you want to hear about the council side of things, maybe we could do that in the Q&A. And I don't know how much time, but I got as long as you guys got. So if you want to do Q&A now, can I go ahead and start that? Is that cool? Okay, and then are there people online who can do Q&A, or? Oh, no one online? Oh, okay. I was going to cry. It's like I've been talking to the camera this whole time.
No, there's people online that have questions. All right. Does anyone have a question inside the audience? Did you have a question?
I mean, anything.
I did have a quick question. I do have some students that are really, really keen on exploring the East Coast. And I hear you have a lot of experience of or kind of where you grew up at. And what can you tell our students about traveling and being able to stay rooted in their Diné culture when traveling outside of home and exploring to grasp some extra education that's outside of Navajo land?
Okay, that's a great question. So, I was in the DC, Maryland area, and I mean, you can travel, say, from Carolinas or Virginia all the way up to Boston and kind of look the same the whole way. I mean, just the way you look at things. But the experiences that you'll have in each of those places can be completely unique. If you're in New York City, you could be totally overwhelmed by the magnitude. They got more people in some of those apartment buildings than we have in the Arizona, let's just say in my district, in Central Agency, whatever you want to say. And that can be overwhelming. So there's the physical reality around you, but I hope that each of you pray each morning. Pray in the morning, the afternoon, the evening. You have your tutadine, your white cornmeal, your yellow cornmeal. Those are the things that you need to stay grounded. And those are things that you can take with you. And, when I was growing up and I was there, my Masana, she brought the drum back. She was always having us practice and checking up on us when she'd come back. And we still were able to carry on a lot of our traditions there. But certain prayers are things that need to be within the 4 sacred mountains. We were reserved for back here. So if you know who you are, I feel like you're going to be comfortable and strong enough to be wherever you want to be. But the rigor, the academic rigor, is something that I've seen some young folks confront no matter where they're at. If they're at ASU or they're at Harvard, you need that mental toughness to be able to survive in those environments. And that's about knowing what your strengths and your limitations are. Maybe it's not the right time for you to jump in and not have your support network. I hope you guys heard about the different support networks that I had and recognized that you can establish those whether or not you have them right now, whether it's friends, family, mentors, and sometimes even if you feel like you don't have all the answers, if you have friends or you have cousins or whatever and you guys are trying to do something, that's your support network and your mutual mentors with one another. So my advice is, to the extent that you can, please visit those schools, please visit the cities to get a little bit of a taste of it, but you won't know until you're there. I had no idea what CC was truly going to be like compared to, going to school in Boston or something. I go on and on forever about that, but I think it's basic points. Any other questions? Harley? Ooh, that's a good question. Okay, so those online who might not have heard it, it's about how do you establish like mentorship relationships on the Navajo Nation, effective communication, things like that. So I remember reading a newspaper article one time, and it was a profile of Jeff Bezos. And, I don't worship these titans of industry or anything like that. I'm just interested in what brought them to those levels, how they operate, what are things that make them successful, and what are some of the, skill sets that maybe I should try to adopt in order to be successful myself and true to myself. And in that profile, I remember them saying that any good idea should be able to be summarized in like a 2-page written document. And that's how he would have his charges beneath him submit concepts in developing Amazon. And I think that he worked at Goldman Sachs, the most, if not one of the most elite investment banks in the entire world. And very dedicated, highly educated, a gunner, right? A guy who's just chasing that next step, wants to be great or be rich. I don't think those are Navajo values, but being good and being great can be if you do it the right way. So that 2-page document is about being a strong writer. If you are a strong writer, it means that you are a strong analytical thinker and can organize your thoughts effectively to be understood by other people. Those words on the paper can exist beyond you being in the room. What was the thing I said right at the beginning? I made a joke, right? Badum-ching. Don't run for office. No, okay. Don't become a council delegate. And it's a joke. You should all invest yourselves in that. You're not going to make any money, but you guys forgot that joke already. But if you had something written down in front of you that had a little humor, that was a little inviting, but also captured an important idea, that's a takeaway you can put in your pocket and review later on. So I think in order to establish mentorship, you need to be an effective communicator. And becoming a strong writer is critical to that. In our tradition, it's very much the oratory, the extemporaneous speaking, being able to draw connections to our stories, to our history, and to those teachings. But in the outside world, that's not the only way in which you operate. Written communication is incredibly key. And you end up becoming a better orator if you're able to write well. You understand what is a thesis statement, what is supporting evidence, how do I be pithy and concise to draw the reader in. You need to have those skills if you want to succeed and be excellent in whatever endeavor you're at. So mentorship to me is a two-way street. If someone comes up to me and they're like, I need advice, whatever, that's my time, right? I'm pretty liberal with my time, if it's for the right reasons. But you need to respect the mentor. If you come in, you're completely disorganized, and you're just asking for someone to set your whole life out in front of you, or to tell you how to do X, Y, or Z, what did you do to prepare to get to that moment? Did you think about and meditate on what your values are? Did you think about different career paths, weigh the pros and cons? Those are the types of things that you ought to do in order to invite that meaningful, intelligent conversation. You got to take that initiative, and you got to help level yourself up to meet that mentor. When they recognize you as a serious person, then they will be more willing to engage and realize that there's value to them. My mentorship, with interns or young people, is guided in trying to get more familiarity with our government so that in whatever path they pursue, whether it's healthcare, education, community organizing. Anyone here do any community organizing? Knocking doors, advocating, there we go. That's critical. You can do that no matter where you're at. If you want to get to that level of having a mentor, you really need to have showed that you've put in the work too. Because if someone's going to invest in you, they don't want it to just all go to naught. So that's my primary advice, is focus and meditate on yourself and what you want to get out of that relationship, because it will inform the asks that you have of that person. And if it's in a work environment, you can seek out those people. But think about organizations that exist that support those entities. There's all sorts of transportation organizations. I ended up seeking leadership positions there, like with the Intertribal Transportation Association. I was their secretary. It's all those types of things that can lead to something completely unknown. So, other questions? And have a sense of humor. And have some humility. Can I say a couple things in closing? Is that cool? Okay. I think that a lot of people here probably saw my story that I just shared as fairly foreign, because a lot of people who are enrolled at Diné College, went to school and lived here 365. But we have so many students, and the majority of our Navajo kids and our Navajo people are off the reservation now. And we're truly at a reckoning point in the Navajo Nation as to what type of society you want to build, who's going to have access to the resources that come in from the federal government, who's going to have access to the budget that we put together from our own indigenous revenue that's derived here on the nation. How are we going to organize the land tenure? How are we going to do business site leasing? We're stronger when we involve all of our voices. And there's a place for each of us here back at home. And we cannot develop a society where we alienate and otherize different types of Navajos based off of where they are and who they are. We've always been a beautifully inclusive people. And I want you to remember that. Because you might be here in Tsaile and be from Saba or something, and that's all you've known your whole life. But then for some reason you end up in Chicago, and you work there for 15 years. But you feel that tug at your heartstrings and your soul to come home. And you do. And it might be a different world than you remembered, or it might be pretty much the same. But every path that you choose, this is your home. And never, never, never forget that. So thank you so much for the opportunity to address you all today. Oh, you got a question?
Yeah, we got a question online. Do you have an understanding of Diné language and its philosophy concept?
Diné language? Yeah, so I think if they were listening before, I was talking about, I'm not a fluent speaker. Studied Navajo. It's important to me. Understand a lot more now than I did before. And it's something that I really want to avail myself of, when I'm not on council anymore and I'm able to focus my whole day on that, essentially, because I'm too busy right now to just spend all my time studying Navajo, then I wouldn't be doing my job as a delegate. But I still do my best to learn. And then I think it was philosophy, so I was talking about, my participation in ceremonies and the teachings. So I hope that person kind of levels up their listening comprehension skills, because we were talking about those things.
Alrighty, well, we want to thank our council delegate, Carl Slater. So could everybody give Carl Slater a round of applause here, coming out to Diné College and speaking to us on behalf of the career education program and our Ascendium internship. We would like to congratulate you and thank you with the gift here from Diné College. So we did get you a nice Pendleton coming into the winter season. It is getting a little colder here, so we do want to show our appreciation for you coming out and being able to speak with our students and also represent our area here as a council delegate. So Kehet, and thank you very much. That is fresh from the Diné College store as well, so really, really cool here from campus. So we want to thank Carl one more time for coming out to campus, being able to speak with our students, share that story of guiding down those college and career pathways. So to all of us on Zoom and live stream, Kehet and thank you. And we'll see you. We'll continue with our live stream at about 2 o'clock. We got our Ascendium panel coming up, so our students that were former Ascendium alumni, Diné College, and now in their college and career pathways. So do look forward to that today at 2 p.m. Kehet, and thank you. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Yeah, this is incredibly generous. Thank you so much. And if anyone wants to reach out to me, I'm on Facebook. Do you stop the live stream? Oh, still going? Okay. And if you have questions related to government or mentorship or things like that, you can reach out there or jot this down. My cell is 301-910-4788. And a good quick email address is just carl@cdcarl.com, like C council, D delegate. So cdcarl.com, carl@cdcarl.com. So always happy to talk and try and make time for anyone who wants some advice or some help. Thank you.